There's a certain kind of person you'll only notice if you're awake when most of the world isn't. It's past midnight. The roads are empty in a way that feels almost unnatural. Streetlights stretch into the distance, one after another, like a quiet rhythm. And somewhere in that silence, there's a car moving steadily, not fast, not slow, just present. Most people are asleep right now. Or if they're awake, they're inside scrolling, watching, distracting themselves from the day they just lived. But this person chose something else. They chose to drive, alone. And at first glance, it looks simple, maybe even random. Just someone killing time, going nowhere in particular. But it's never really about that. Because people don't accidentally end up alone on empty roads at night. There's always a reason. Sometimes it starts as a habit. A late-night errand that slowly turns into a routine. A quick drive that becomes longer each time. Until one day you realize you're not driving to reach somewhere anymore. You're driving to feel something. And this is where it gets interesting, because the night does something to people. It strips away noise. Not just the sound of traffic or conversations, but the psychological noise, expectations, roles, the constant pressure to be someone specific. During the day, you're defined by your work, your responsibilities, how people see you. But at night, especially when you're alone in a car, none of that exists in the same way. You're not performing for anyone. You're just there. And for some people, that feeling's rare, almost addictive. Now consider this. The car itself becomes more than just a vehicle. It turns into a controlled environment. A small moving space where everything is predictable. You control the speed, the direction, the music, the temperature. In a world that often feels chaotic, uncertain, this is one of the few places where control is absolute. And people who crave these drives, they're usually the ones who don't feel that control anywhere else. Not fully, not consistently. So they create it here. But there's something more beneath that, because it's not just about control. It's about escape, but not in the way people usually think. They're not running away from something obvious. They're stepping away from something subtle, the constant weight of being on. And as the road stretches further into the dark, something begins to shift. Not all at once, but gradually. At first, it's just the quiet, the absence of interruption. No notifications, no conversations you have to maintain, no expectations pressing in from the outside. And then, without realizing it, your mind starts to fill that space. Thoughts you ignored earlier in the day begin to surface. Small ones at first. Random memories. Half-finished conversations. Things you meant to say, but didn't. Most people avoid this moment. They turn up the music, reach for their phone, distract themselves before the silence gets too loud. But this person doesn't. They keep driving. Because somewhere along the way, they've learned that this is the only time those thoughts come out honestly. This is where it gets interesting. Because the night drive isn't just quiet on the outside. It creates a kind of mental state that's hard to access anywhere else. A rhythm between motion and stillness. The body is moving, but the mind is finally allowed to slow down. Psychologists sometimes describe this as a flow state, not the intense, high-performance version people talk about, but a softer one, where attention is focused just enough to keep you grounded, but open enough to let deeper thoughts pass through. And that's exactly what driving alone at night does. The road gives you just enough to pay attention to, while leaving space for everything else. Now consider what kind of person keeps coming back to that. It's usually someone who carries more than they show, not in a dramatic way. You wouldn't necessarily notice it if you met them during the day. They function normally. They talk, laugh, go through routines like everyone else. But internally, there's always something running in the background. Unprocessed thoughts, questions they haven't answered yet, emotions they don't fully express. And during the day, there's no room for that. So it waits until the road is empty, until the world quiets down enough for them to hear themselves think. But there's something more. Because over time, this doesn't just become a habit. It becomes a kind of relationship with the night, with the road, and strangely, with themselves. They start to recognize patterns. The same streets, the same turns, the same songs playing at the same moments. And within that repetition, something subtle happens. The outside world becomes predictable, which makes the inside world easier to explore. Now, the drive isn't just about thinking. It's about understanding why certain things bother them more than they admit, why some decisions don't feel right, even if they make sense. why they feel disconnected in places where they're supposed to belong. These aren't questions you answer in a conversation. They're questions that show up when you're alone, moving through the dark, with nowhere to be and no one to impress. And yet, even that isn't the deepest part of it. Because if it was just about thinking, they could do that anywhere. At home, in bed, sitting still. But they don't. They choose the road. And that choice reveals something more about who they are. Because the road doesn't just give them space to think. It gives them a feeling they can't quite find anywhere else. A sense of distance from everything. Not physical distance, but psychological. Like they've stepped just far enough away from their own life to finally see it clearly. During the day, you're inside your decisions, inside your routines. You're reacting, adjusting, responding. There's a space between you and what's happening. But out here, there is. And that space changes everything. Now consider this. When someone drives alone at night, they're not just observing the road. They're observing themselves from a distance. The way they replay conversations. The way certain memories keep returning. The things they pretend don't matter, but clearly do. And slowly, a pattern starts to form. This isn't really about driving. It's about processing a version of life they don't fully understand yet. Because some people don't process things in real time. They experience first and only understand later. And for them, the night becomes that later. But there's something even deeper underneath this. Because if you watch closely, these drives are rarely completely random. They follow invisible routes. Familiar roads. Specific turns. Certain places they pass again and again. Not because it's efficient, but because it feels right. Almost like those places hold something. A memory. A version of themselves. A moment they haven't fully let go of. And instead of confronting it directly, they circle around it. Again and again and again. This is where it gets uncomfortable. Because what looks like freedom on the surface can also be a form of avoidance. Not obvious avoidance, the kind where someone runs away from problems, but a quieter version, where you stay in motion so you never have to stop completely, where the road keeps you just occupied enough to not go too deep. And that's the paradox. The same drive that helps them understand themselves can also keep them from fully facing themselves, and most of the time, they don't even realize it. They tell themselves they're clearing their mind, finding peace, but sometimes they're just delaying something. A decision they've been putting off, a truth they don't want to admit, a change they know they need to make, but haven't yet. And the longer the road stretches into the night, the easier it becomes to keep postponing that moment. But here's where it shifts again, because not everyone who drives alone at night is avoiding something. Some are searching, not for answers exactly, but for a feeling, clarity, alignment, a sense that their life actually fits who they are. And during these drives, they get glimpses of it, small moments where everything feels right. The music, the road, the thoughts, it all lines up for just a second. And in that second, they feel like themselves again. Not the version shaped by expectations. Not the version performing for others. Just them. And once you feel that, even briefly, you start coming back for it, again and again. Even if you can't fully explain why. But that raises a different kind of question. Because if those moments only exist on empty roads, what does that say about everything else? What does it mean when the most honest version of you only shows up when no one is watching, when nothing is expected, when the world is finally quiet enough to stop asking things from you? At some point, the drive ends. It always does. The same streets that felt endless begin to loop back. The fuel gets lower. The sky slowly shifts, almost unnoticed. And eventually, you find yourself pulling back into familiar places, parking in front of a life that's been waiting for you to return. And for a second, you just sit there. Engine off. Silence again, but a different kind this time. Because now, it's not the silence of escape, it's the silence of transition. This is where it gets subtle, because nothing about your life has actually changed. The same responsibilities are still there, the same people, the same expectations waiting for you in the morning. But something feels slightly different, not bigger, not dramatic, just clearer, like you've seen a version of yourself that doesn't fully fit into your daily life anymore. And that feeling stays with you, not loudly, but quietly enough to follow you into the next day, into conversations, into decisions, into moments where you pause just a little longer than usual, thinking about what actually feels right. And this is where most people face a choice they don't even realize they're making. They can keep the night separate, keep those drives as a private escape, a hidden version of themselves that only exists in silence and motion, never brought into the light. Or they can start carrying pieces of that version into their real life. And that's harder, because it means changing things. Small things at first, saying what you actually think instead of what's expected, letting go of routines that don't feel like yours anymore, admitting certain truths, not during a drive, not in your head but out loud, where they have consequences, and most people hesitate there. Because it's easier to drive, easier to wait for the next quiet night, the next empty road, the next temporary clarity. But eventually, even that starts to feel incomplete. Because those moments of alignment, they're not meant to stay in the car. They're meant to follow you out of it, into the parts of life where things are less controlled, less predictable, more real. And maybe that's what those late-night drives were never trying to give you. Not escape, not even answers, just a glimpse of who you are when nothing is shaping you. And the real question isn't why some people drive alone at night. It's what they do with what they find there when the road ends. And now I'm curious, when was the last time you drove like that? Not to go somewhere, but just to be alone with your thoughts. What did you realize that you never said out loud? You don't have to explain everything. Just leave it in the comments, even if it's a single line. And if this kind of thinking, this kind of perspective feels like something you don't usually find, then subscribe, because there's a lot more beneath the surface, and you already know that.